Well, I redid some of the lighting and I hope it shows up these lines a little better. I went ahead and did to this other side what I did to this side. So you can get an idea of what the barrel will look like. One of the things I forgot to mention is these also are called stock screws. And these don't get used till much later, and these are made to be used with the trigger guard when you're saying put it in from the bottom. These we don't use for a while. Okay, now we come around to actually cutting wood. Now one of the things I use, and if you go into this in a big way, you'll want to get, this is a piece of tool steel, and what's done is one edge here is actually at being ground to a 5-degree angle. What that allows is when this is sitting down and I'm running my tool back and forth to cut the wood, I'm actually making sure I go in. And this is thick enough to make so I have a flat edge I can really grip. But since not everybody has one of those, we're going to go with this. This has a very thin edge, no angle, so we're going to have to be very careful that as you're cutting along here, you don't accidentally end up with the blade cocked in your undercutting. You always want to try to keep it at a very slight angle to the outside. Now part of the problem, on this side, there's plenty of meat to clamp. We're going to have a problem when it comes to this side. But of course there's ways around it. And since I hit the on button on the camera, of course I didn't gather all that stuff up, so if you'll excuse me, once again, I'll be back. Okay, well this is the big secret. It's just a 2x4. I ripped it through my saw to get rid of the curves, make sure it's somewhat straight. And this now gives me the support here on the sides that I need. Now I'm going to start with the receiver end and see about getting these two cut first. Okay, now I have to line this up a little bit. Too much, of course. Alrighty, I think that will work. Snug these down. Now we go at it with this. First few cuts you want to make are very light. All we're trying to do is cut the worst, cut this top grain without it tearing. Even though this is pretty sharp, well, maybe I should say past tense. think it's mounts against something. Okay, now I'm going, because this is where it ends, you start, cut a little bit, and the same thing from this end. And cut a little bit. Boy, that thing is flexible. Starting to wonder if an X-Acto knife would work better. Because the grain seems to be making this thing wander all over the place. It's just not very stiff. Yep, catching myself undercutting here, so you have to be careful. Yep, I think this might not be, that's just too wobbly. And even though I'm off the camera, see what I can do with some X-Acto knives. Okay, what I'm doing, because this is round, I can set it down and I'm rocking it. And because I'm not pulling it, the grain really is not going to move it around too much. So this way, I'm telling it where to go, not the grain. And this is a lot stiffer. Yep, I think that's the way to do it. Okay, so you can see what the process is here. I'm not going to bore you, but I'm going to get this down probably with the knife until it's about this deep. Say that's a little over 1/8 of an inch. Well, this top and this bottom one are now done. And now I'm going to start the barrel, and I'm only going to be able to get this very short section here. And I'm going to run it out into the regular barrel channel. And when I start picking up the other ones, well, yes, there'll be a little bit of overlap, but at least I'll have the grain cut along there. Boy, this is some crazy grain. That should do this section. Then we just repeat this same procedure all the way down, flip it over, and do it along this side. And then I'll come back and add the little extra pieces, and then this of course has to be split. I might do this in front of this hole, just so I don't end up with some chip out. Well, I'll see you in a little while when I get all this accomplished. Well, now you can see all the lines are in. They're cut pretty deep. Got a partition. Now we just use a plain old straight. And what we want you to do is come in and right here on the edge, just pop it gently. Good sharp chisel. Okay, now you can see this has a nice deep, so that we can go back and still do some more digging. Now one of the things to avoid doing this is a special tool. I think I pointed this out earlier. It's one of these nasty looking hooks. And when the metal is down here on the side, and I'm doing this initial cutting, I also come back and I drag this hook along. And this makes a deep, nice deep, wide groove, which takes the place of coming back and doing this. Unless you're doing a lot of gun stocks, it's not worth coming up with this. And I mean by coming up with it, I don't know if you can buy them. You probably have to make it. So now what I'm going to do is continue to do this all the way around. As you can see, this is now starting to sink down a little. I left a little bit of wood here so I can show you some tips. For one thing, I'm using a gouge. This is really so that when you're coming in, let's see if I can find a chunk of wood here. Do it so the camera can see. Even with a big chip, I'm cutting all the way around, and what I'm doing is preventing the side of this chip from wandering off. This is going to happen. See if I can make it happen here. This is a small flat. I don't know if this is going to show up on the camera, but all the way along the side here, here's one of these chips that just blew off the side. Here's another one that's trying to, and this is just shredded. It kind of fractured itself. So here's two in a length of, oh, maybe an inch, where I had two pieces that broke off from the side. And that can be really disastrous. So that's why I recommend making sure you use a gouge here on the inside. Now because of the figure of this wood, oddly enough, it really seems to cut a lot easier when I go across the grain. This is especially common with maple, not so much with walnut. Now as I'm going through this channel, you want to take a lot of care when you're approaching my edge here, because you don't want to slam into it. You can later on, but for the moment, let's just take it easy. Okay, now I'm not going to bore you with continuing on, but about this stage, and maybe take off one more layer, you guys with the power tools can use them to take it down to depth or close to it. The more wood you leave on the side, the better off you're going to be. Remember, with the power tools, you can take it off in a hurry, but if you have the tiniest little miscalculation or something doesn't go right, you're going to find a big chunk of wood missing. And of course you can always take the wood off, but it's mighty hard to put the wood back in. So please do be careful of it. If you're going to use a router, set it up. You can use the side of this, and since the center of this is fairly straight, and be careful just how deep you go. Now as I'm going along, I'll show you some tricks on making sure you don't get too deep. So let me finish this up and see if I can get a little further along. Alright, well, I have this all down a little bit, and it's time to start making some impressions. I'm now down far enough I can start forming and finding out where this goes, because remember I left that I didn't put any lines in there. And the other one, of course, is where this lug is going. Now when I'm done, I'm not going to leave the back of this lug wood. I tend to put a very thin piece of steel and epoxy it in. That gives this a very sound shoulder for it to hit against, and I don't have the problems of things moving quite so much in the wood later on. And another little trick, set it down, put a piece of tape out here. Remember I mentioned how much this black just kind of coats everything? Well, that does help some. It tells me don't go past this blue tape, and of course with my hand grabbing this, that means keep my hand on that side. And yes, it really does help. Now for some black. Now I don't expect this to hit very many places. This is really early on. But give us an idea of where we're sitting. Like I said, there's not going to be a whole lot. There certainly isn't. I have a little tiny streak here, little one there, and of course with the lug. That's the only place it touches, and there begins the black marks. Don't even know where that came from, huh? Who knows? And I forgot to set some blocks up to set this on. I'll be back in a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. Now the black marks are starting to show up outside of the lug. Since this you can see where the black is missing from the back. Well, maybe on the camera you can't, but I can see the black here has disappeared all the way to the end, so that means it's all very nicely put on the wood here. Now as I'm going along, this also will help shape where the section of the stock where your thumb goes across the top. This hopefully will show up a little right here. And as this goes down, I will have to start adding the cutout where your thumb goes. The lug is still continuing to go down, and it doesn't touch any place else. I think I pulled it in and out 4 times to get this deep. In other words, you'll be doing it a lot. Alrighty, I'll do this a little further and we'll see what happens. Well, this is a little more progress, and now time to catch up on a couple of techniques. One of the things coming along, and actually I probably should turn this a little sideways so you can see it a little easier. That's what I like about this carving vise. is right here in the back. You can see where I'm starting to carve this out. The way you'll slowly end up with this is going to sink down and the wood is going to stand up around it. You'll have to keep it carved down, and the way you do that, this has a very slight bevel to it from the full thickness of the chisel out here to the point. We're going to take advantage of that. Take the bevel, and it's going to feel a little spooky in the beginning, but you set that bevel against the metal of your receiver and you push it forward until you can feel it hit the wood. And as you're pushing down, kind of curve out. And the first few times you do this, well, yes, you can gouge metal. You have to be careful with the wood. Things will twist and turn. So when you're up high and you have a long ways to sink, it's a good opportunity to practice. As you're going along, you also find out how you can be very subtle about it. Excuse me. Let's see, I stopped with the words, being subtle about it. This will automatically start forming the curve from your metal, and you can put it into your wood. Don't do it immediately. All we want to do is just keep the wood trimmed down around here so you have easy access to it. Because if you're trying to reach in half an inch down to get this sharp edge, and when I pull this metal out, you'll see this is difficult to get to. If it's only, as thick as the edges here on the back of your receiver, life makes it a whole lot easier. You're going to have to remove this wood anyway, so we might as well start at it now. When you get this down, yes, you'll have to come in here and keep trimming a little bit away, because eventually you'll have a dish, which we don't want too much. Now, one of the things you'll have to be aware of, as you're pushing down and curving up, you'll end up with a very small ridge around here that might, it could be 1/8 of an inch tall. Try to avoid that. If you'll notice, part of the time I was coming down and sliding this sideways. And now getting this little curl, you don't learn to do that overnight, I will admit it. But it's something you can teach yourself. And what I'm trying to avoid is a very small ramp of wood. It starts, let's see, how can I do this so you can see it? It'll be about this far away. You'll have a ramp coming up to your wood, and what that will do eventually is it's too small, the wood that you'll leave over here. It'll break when you get this thing all settled down to where it belongs. So we want to keep this whole thing just about flat all the way into your receiver. We can always do the curving later. So that's the one big point there. Now, as we're pulling this out, yeah, there's a little bit more progress. You'll start noticing some lines. The line here and around here. This is actually where my trigger group goes. That will be in here, so of course no black will show up, so I just kind of chisel it out as I go along. Same thing here with the cutouts for the magazine. That's along here. So again, it'll just be scooping it out as I go along. Now eventually I will drill that out, of course, to get it removed in a hurry. Now, what I was talking about with these difficult lines, as they're starting to gather around the edges, This is going to be one of the hardest parts to reach with a chisel. You'll have to just develop the patience to do it. And every once in a while, sometimes a scraper works. And a scraper can be as very simple as this. Single-edged razor blade. I could come in here and very subtly imagine you can hear this thing scraping, because there's no law saying you have to have a hook on a razor blade. This certainly doesn't have one. It's just flat with a sharp edge on it, like I'm using this. And we can go around this and at the very top I'm still leaving a tiny thin black line along the edge. I'm more or less probably crushing some of it with the metal as I'm pounding it down because it's so small. And you might have heard of old-timers taking a glass bottle and breaking it. And of course, with all the different shapes you can get, it actually works surprisingly well. The only trouble is the chunk of glass is sharp all the way around, and well, I end up bleeding on stuff well enough without having to go through that. This works quite well as a very straight scraper. And of course it's rather inexpensive, and when it gets too dull you can throw them out. You can buy them in these boxes of 100 from the larger hardware stores. So that should give you a couple of clues, and every once in a while when you start seeing some dappling, you can go in with a scraper. And the idea with the scraper, if I went like this, I'm in line with these tiger stripes, so as I hit hard and soft, I'm going to make these ripples even worse. So hold it at a slight angle, and there's a dog that's going to get hollered at in a minute. And this will just kind of iron out a lot of those ripples. I'm spanning across them. And we got some more here, and you can just keep doing the same thing. And keep going. And I've just now started getting over here in the barrel channel. The first two black marks are showing up. So we're progressing down, and after about 25 pulls, I forgot to keep count. So the count is slowly building, something you'll get used to.